There you go. Good evening, folks. Thanks for your patience in getting underway, but we will. It is 7:06, calling to order our regular meeting of council for Monday, April 10th. There is, at this time, a change in our agenda. And, council, I'm looking for a motion to remove item number 7.4, which is under our bylaw section. Staff is requiring a bit of extra time to do some more work in here. So bylaw number 1673 could be pulled off, and we'll deal with that later.
Move the agenda as amended.
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Then we are back up to the top, folks, and looking for public participation. So any of the members of the public that wish to address council, the microphone is on. Please come forward with your name and address, and if you don't want that audio, provide it to the clerk on the side. But now's your time. Thank you.
Good evening, Your Worship. I'm Mr. Wright. I reside on Marianne Crescent. If it would please Your Worship, I have some comments regarding agenda item 6.2.1, the report from the Director of Finance. In the supplemental information provided, which is expected to form an integral component of proposed bylaw 1673, I would like to first bring your attention to Schedule A, specifically the transfers from the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund. As will be indicated in the two reports from the Planning and Land Use Committee, as agenda items 6.12 and 6.13, I note there is an expected depletion of $548,000 from this fund. Could the Director provide clarification to the public why this amount is not presented as a transfer from reserves for 2013 in the first column on the second page of that schedule? Currently, Schedule A, the 5-year financial plan, states that transfers from the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund are to be zero for the next 5 years, which is somewhat disconcerting given the importance of the two developments to our community that will be discussed tonight. Further, Your Worship, when the Director presents Schedule B, Table 2, Distribution of Property Tax Revenue, would it be possible to have an explanation of the methodology that was used to apportion revenue between the 6 property classes that occur in Colwood, so that the taxpayers can understand how the weightings shown in the second column were arrived at? Thank you, Your Worship.
Any other members of the public? Any other members of the public wishing to address council? Seeing none, we shall move on. Next on our agenda, Mayor's message. First of all, thanks to fellow council members, Councillors Day and Trace, who attended AVICC along with myself this weekend up in Campbell River. It was really wholesome discussions over a number of agenda items that affect many of our coastal regions, and those resolutions will be forwarded through to UBCM for further discussion with members of the province. So we look forward to that in September. As well, coming up on Wednesday, we have Councillors Chong and Nault, who will be attending the Bike to Work kickoff on Wednesday morning, 11, I believe it is. So they will be representing all of you who ride bikes and commute in a presentation there in City Square in downtown Victoria. Anybody else coming up? Councillor Chung?
Thanks. Just a reminder, there is a Easter egg hunt on Saturday, April 15th. It's from 2 to 4 at Royal Bay.
And I was going to say, rumor has it there might be a bunny down there. Councillor Nault?
Yes, I don't know how many of you got the opportunity to attend the Vimy Memorial at Fort Rod on Saturday. It went off very well in spite of the wind and the rain. It was quite well attended. The 100-gun salute was really neat to watch in the dark, and very informative. They have a new plaque to General Curry at the fort now. all in all, they did a very good job organizing it.
And I'll just add that in addition to the Vimy Memorial celebration down there, they've been working very hard towards a Canada 150 overall project. So well worth the visit down there this year for sure. Moving on from there, we have item number 3.1 is a letter from Minister Fassbender in regards to the $10,000 grant for stormwater master plan that we have received. So it's just an acknowledgement there for receipt. Please, Council.
Move receipt, Your Worship.
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Adoption of 2 sets of minutes, one for the regular meeting of Council for March the 27th, and the other for the public hearing on also March 27th.
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. 3 sets of minutes for receipt, Planning and Land Use February 7th, Planning and Land Use March 7th, and report of public hearing March 27th.
Move receipt.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. We are also in receipt of a fundraising letter that was directed to us here at City Hall, as well as many other members within the community, looking for a donation towards the Royal Canadian Legion golf tournament upcoming. There is a reminder that we do provide the Legion with $2,500 each year. Receipt?
Move receipt, Your Worship.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Second piece of correspondence from the mayor of the city of Vernon, looking for us to participate in a petition to remove the GST that's being charged on the carbon tax. When one looks at the resolution of their council, this does involve taxation from the federal government on a carbon tax imposed by the province. I don't see where this is. I think what they're doing with this is sending it through their SLIGA, similar to our AVICC, through to UBCM. So we will be dealing with this at UBCM, I can imagine. Council's wish?
I'll move receipt, Madam Mayor, noting that the writer did not ask that Council specifically do anything, but invited us, if we are also concerned with this matter, to sign their e-petition.
Seconder, please.
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Item 6.1 under Planning and Land Use Committee. This one is a recommendation for variance permit application DVP 17001 for 1939 and 1945 Sooke Road.
Thank you, Worship. Last week we had 3 very exciting applications come before committee, and this one was first out of the hopper. And this one, the applicant has applied for a development variance permit requesting a relaxation of the required parking spaces from 41 to 33, which includes small car parking for 20% of the spaces, the relaxation of the environmental protection setbacks for Colwood Creek from 30 meters to 15 north of the dam and 19.2 meters south of the dam, and the relaxation of the front yard setback from 4.5 meters to 2.0 meters, and the side yard setback from 4.5 meters to 1.0 meters in order to facilitate the construction of a boarding school, which will have 150 local students as well as 150 boarding students, consisting of 5 buildings between 1 and 6 stories in height. A lot of this, the discussion last week revolved around the relaxation or the reduction of the riparian area. We did hear from Patrick Lucy, an aquatic ecologist, who explained that a full review has been conducted of all matters surrounding the proposed development and confirmed that he's comfortable with the riparian area plan. He also stated that he is recommending extra precautions and the very stringent requirements to ensure nothing will happen unless sanctioned by him personally as the qualified environmental professional of record. And it should be noted that Mr. Lucy probably is the most knowledgeable person in all things Colwood Creek. So he does bring some authority with his comments. Mr. Lucy also explained that there will be daily monitoring of the development site, and there is a zero tolerance policy in place along with a very stringent plan. I won't go, I'll move the recommendation. The recommendation was made from committee, and I so move what's before us.
Seconder, please. Councillor Day.
And I do want to note that this is a very extensive application with a very extensive professional review. And I did confirm what the plan would be for the boulevard and that portion of the property that is dammed and currently is more of a lake. And that portion of the creek was determined by the applicant's professional to be more of an amphibian-friendly environment than a fish-friendly environment. But I do want to share with council that we did receive at committee, and subsequent to the committee meeting, I've also received phone calls from the active Colwood residents who've also been involved in that creek for many, many years, describing that they have trapped fish in that area, salmonoid species, in the recent past. So there were, it's a very extensive plan to remove invasive species and to be careful to restore the biological functioning of the creek. But at the same time, there is concern and remains concern with the size of the setback. In my estimation, though, I feel that despite reducing the setbacks from 30 meters to 15 meters, I'm hopeful that with all the other restoration work that's going to go on there, that it will still be a better outcome than if it was left as is with the 30 meters not touched.
Thank you. Any other members of council? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Next item under planning and land use, 6.1.2, rezoning application RZ 16009 and development variance permit number DVP 17002 for 2006 Sooke Road.
Thank you, Worship. Committee also heard this application last week, and here the applicant is requesting to rezone the property from its existing low-density housing zone to medium-density low-rise residential in order to facilitate the construction of a 4-story, 82-unit affordable housing complex. Part of the rezoning application, as part of the rezoning application, the applicant is asking council to consider waiving the municipal application fees, development cost charges, frontage requirements, and for a contribution to the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund. We are recommending that we meet them kind of halfway, and staff had recommended waiving contributions associated with the rezoning to the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund and waiving contributions required for the Community Amenity Reserve Fund as well, in addition to providing a $4,000 grant per dwelling unit for units not exceeding the housing income limits set by BC Housing. The total waiver and grant for this development is approximately $464,000. The requirements, which would have the effect of reducing the number of parking spaces from 135 to 78, providing a ratio of 0.96 parking spaces per unit, with small car parking proposed for 13% of the spaces, was deemed reasonable by staff. The parking proposal is supported by a parking study from Watt Consulting Group, and staff have absolutely no objections to the parking standards proposed for 2006 Sooke Road. The applicants explained that the location of the proposed development is ideal for residents because of the accessibility to public transit and the city center core area. The units will consist of bachelor 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units to allow residents to age in place as the family dynamics change and staying in the community they're familiar with, and have a bicycling facility and charging stations for scooters. I will move all 3 recommendations all at once, Your Worship. So it was recommended by committee, and I so move 7.1, 7.2, and 7.3. And before I do that,
I was
actually,
going to just say,
I need to refer to the Director of Finance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Planning, sorry. I'll be right. I was looking at Andrea and thinking of Ian.
Yeah, just wanted to make a correction to the staff report that came to Planning and Land Use. On page 3 of 9 of that report, staff implied that the frontage improvements for this project would be creditable to the development cost charge program. We've discovered that's not the case, and I'm going to be bringing forward a memorandum to council prior to first reading for this project to explain that. It really is a clarification to explain what the city is recommending in terms of development cost charge contributions and frontage improvements relative to what the applicant has proposed for relaxations. So we'll expect that to come forward with the bylaw if council so chooses to endorse committee's recommendation. Thank you.
Now I'll move the recommendations, Your Worship.
And we have
For discussion, but I need some clarification on
Councillor Day.
that point. Just in regards to, will there be frontage improvements or not? Because as I read the application, I felt that the frontage improvements were not discussed in the recommendation coming forward. So I thought they were in.
Your Worship, the applicant has requested that the city not require contributions to the development cost charge program, and also provide a variance to the standard for frontage improvements. In the staff report, we stated that we recommended that those relaxations not be provided, that they have to pay development cost charges and build the frontage as per the standard. However, we also implied that the work they do in the frontage would be creditable against the development cost charge program, so they get that money back. That's not the case under the current bylaw. So to do justice to the request of the applicant, we thought it'd be best to bring it back in writing in the form of a memorandum. It doesn't really impact the decision before council tonight because we can look at this again prior to first reading.
Thank you. Then I am still prepared to support the motion as written before us. And I would just add that it is my hope that we will still have some frontage improvements on Sooke Road because it's a very important pedestrian connection for the area and a very busy road. So in supporting the people who are going to live there, I think it's important to have that.
anyone else? Call the question on that recommendation. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Are there more?
No,
To this?
we moved all 3 of them, Your Worship.
Okay. I just want to clarify, we're not doing those ones then that are in there?
Yes, yeah, we moved 7.1, 7.2, and 7.3 all at
Okay,
once.
all those 3. Okay, fine, just checking. I'd counted 1, 2, and 3. Moving forward then on to the following item, which is 6.1.3, rezoning text amendment RZ 16007 and development variance permit DVP 17010 for 324 Goldstream Avenue.
Thank you, Worship. I'm excited to bring this forward to council from committee. And I will say that the applicant in this one has applied for a zoning text amendment and a development variance permit for 324 Goldstream Avenue in order to support the subdivision and facilitate the construction of a 6-story 104-unit affordable housing complex, which will be owned and operated by the Greater Victoria Housing Society. The GVHS is also requesting financial support from the city related to the provision of affordable housing units, and that the zoning text amendment include the addition of attached housing to the list of permitted uses in the C8A zone, as well as the deletion of the requirement for a $1,500 community amenity contribution and the deletion of the commercial floor space requirement in Area 2, as well as some other administrative changes to the bylaw. As mentioned, the GVHS is requesting financial support from the city, as well as a contribution from the city towards a passive house premium, and that staff recommend waiving the contributions associated with the rezoning to the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund and to the Community Amenity Reserve Fund, in addition to providing a $4,000 grant per dwelling unit for units not exceeding housing income limits set by BC Housing, and that the grant may be used by the applicant to cover the city's application fees and would require a covenant to ensure that the units meet the housing income limit requirement, and that the total waiver and grant for this development is approximately $422,000. So in essence, the waivers and the grant is exactly the same for this application as was recommended and approved by for the previous application. As mentioned, the proposed development is consisting of a total of 104 1, 2, and 3-bedroom rental units, a 10-bedroom transitional housing unit, and a car share program. The applicant explained that the structure is to be the largest passive housing project in Canada, and the occupancy is projected for the fall of 2018. It was recommended by committee, and I so move the recommendation before us.
Discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Just before we move on away from these last two items, I want to say it's been a very long time since the City of Colwood has seen any opportunity for affordable housing brought forward in this kind of manner. So I think on behalf of Council, we're excited to see these things take place and provide option for the community. So thanks to everyone who's worked so hard on these files. Moving on to 6.1.4, report Director of Planning in regards to the deletion of secondary suites and accessory building unit permit requirements.
Thank you, Worship. The report before you outlines critical issues with the city's approach to the permitting of secondary suites. This became apparent to staff recently once we were looking at changing the process relative to the deletion of the fee requirement for secondary suite permits. So it gave us a chance to take a close look at the overall system, and we identified some major problems. Firstly, the requirements for smoke detectors overlap with the BC Building Code and are not being enforced consistently throughout the community. Secondly, the issuance of permits for secondary suites and accessory dwelling units may give the public a false impression that the suite is free of life safety concerns, or at least that it is being certified as such by the city. This also creates major liability issues for the city, which has caused staff to accordingly recommend, as stated in the staff report, that Council receive the report and give consideration to two bylaws that are in the bylaw section of this agenda. One would repeal the secondary suites and accessory dwelling units procedures bylaw, and then the second would remove the requirements or the references to permitting in the land use bylaw. So that would leave homeowners that have secondary suites with the right to continue having secondary suites. They simply just wouldn't have that permitting requirement. Staff are also moving up the project to review the overall regulation of secondary suites with the assistance of a consultant as outlined in the preliminary budget for 2017. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Day?
I'll move receipt of the report.
Second.
Comments, questions? I have one to staff. Are we, by receiving, are we not addressing the second part of your report?
Madam Mayor, the second recommendation is simply that council give consideration to the bylaws, which will be a matter of course.
We can do that when we get
Yep.
there. Perfect. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Just moving on into finance, we have a report from Director of Finance in regards to the financial plan bylaw.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So our last budget meeting was March 2nd, and at that meeting, council did direct staff to bring back the bylaw, the budget bylaw, in bylaw form. So we always have events that come up after we do the budget, and it's always, every year, it's like there's a time period where we can elect to include them or it will roll forward into the next year's budget. So this evening there were some subsequent events that came up after I'd even drafted this report, and we would like to pull the actual bylaw to make some changes to reflect that information and bring it back to your next council meeting in 2 weeks. But you do have before you a summary of some of the things that I did know about that I wanted to bring to your attention. Sometimes things arrive, I call it with a thump on my desk, which I did not see coming, and it's my job to bring them before you for your consideration. So in total, just looking at my report, the changes based on a budget of $26 million are, I call them minor, but I understand that council definitely will like to perhaps have some discussion on some of these. So the first item is that our total revenues and the corresponding transfers to reserves have increased by $57,500, and this reflects a few items that I've laid out for you. One of the things that often comes up when we're doing our quarterly review for council, comparing actuals to budget, is that we didn't normally budget our interest income, and there was always a good question raised about that. And so we had a hard look at it and went, you're right, some of that income, we will recognize it. It is money that is being earned on our reserves. Some of it isn't our income to keep, so that is not reflected here, like the gas tax fund. But that does add $110,000 to our revenue. We also realized on closer examination that there was a small amount that hadn't been put in there for the spring cleanup program, so we've added $14,000 and change for that. And when I brought forward the preliminary revenue calculations, I was actually very pleased to see that I had based them on our roll, which we received the first week of December. There's always appeals. Royal Bay had appealed. I'd had to guess at the amount of that appeal, and I was within $17,000. So I was very pleased with that, because I don't like to surprise council with big swings in that. So that came in very close. Now, when we looked at that, we realized that we had actually overstated our PILT taxation monies. When I had initially put the budget together, we were looking at a higher tax increase, and I had added that onto our PILT revenues and did a final review and went, no, that needs to come out. So we have reduced the PILT revenues somewhat, and that's also to reflect some of our actual monies received. On the second page of my report, the total expenses have increased by $80,300, and the corresponding amount is those expenses are being funded from reserves. So a couple of these items council is aware of, and you've passed motions to that effect. This is just to make sure that you see that we have incorporated them. So the $42,000 was to fund a half-time RCMP watch clerk, and that was offset by reductions in the overtime and casual budgets. So that actually is no difference. That's a net zero effect. And the item that I did not see coming was a request from the City of Langford, and this is to do with the West Shore RCMP building. I did do a fair bit of research with the Director of Finance from Langford to try to determine was this business as usual. Now, we do have a building agreement with Langford and with View Royal regarding the costs of that building. And if it gives council some comfort, we do have a reserve fund. We have not drawn any monies out of that fund for about 8 years. And they are now looking at doing some changes to the building, including updating the HVAC controls, putting in some exhaust fans. And normally this is something that would come from the building reserve fund, and as I said, it hasn't been touched for 8 years. We do have the funds in there, but I definitely have put this in my report for your consideration. And the final item there was $3,500 from the city's public art reserve, was approved at a March 13th meeting for a mural at Wishart Elementary. And a subsequent event that is not reflected in here, which has been pointed out by our citizen this evening, is the possible drawdown on the affordable housing reserve, because that did come up subsequent to the draft budget that council looked at. So that will be looked at and brought back. So that basically is a summary, but because we would like to review a couple of items, basically in the budget bylaw itself, there is a supporting schedule, and I realized after the fact that there was a typo and there was a number left out of Table 2. It does not affect the actual budget itself, the amount of taxation or anything like that. It is an explanatory note, Table 2 of Schedule B, and it basically should have read 13 million and change, not 1,300,000, etc. So we will correct that and also make a couple of other amendments. So I will see if council probably has a few questions.
Questions first, council? Councillor Day?
Thanks. I'm looking at Schedule A of the 5-year financial plan that's part of the bylaw. And I just wanted to make sure that I understood what was happening with our budget, because some items go down in 2019 and some go up. So, for example, looking at government transfers for 2017, it's 2,332,000 and change. And then in 2018, that goes down to 2,170,000 and change. And then in 2019, it goes up to 5,856,000 and change. So I'm just wondering if maybe there was some sort of a spreadsheet not carry through or something.
Through your worship, the mayor, to Councillor Day. Actually, we did review that. That is our capital expenditures, which are not even. And so for those years when we're doing major capital projects that are grant dependent, it will push those numbers up and down. Perhaps.
Perfect. Makes perfect sense now that you say that. And my other question was under the expenses for protective services, of course, our largest expense being our fire and police services. We have $6,585,000 for this year, $6,772,000 for the following year, and it goes up a little bit. So I just wanted to make sure that that does include ongoing the increase that we've just seen retroactively applied to the RCMP contract.
So when we do our budget, we have to base it on what the federal government advises us for their estimates in the contract. And there was just recently on the weekend, I believe, wage increases announced, and we had known those were coming. And so what we did right at year end is we made an adjusting entry. We had a little bit of money that we had not expended in the federal contract of about $170,000. That was the difference between what we'd actually been invoiced and the amount of the contract. We have set those monies aside in a wages payable fund, and that was based on information the federal government had provided us with. They thought it was around $12,000 a member was their estimate, and we were able to accrue almost that full amount based on the amount of money. Does that answer your question? Because I think that's been top of mind for a lot of people, is the wage increase.
Yeah, I just wanted to be sure that the budget that we're preparing for the next 5 years is pretty as close as we can be accurately recording what our costs will be for the RCMP contract.
Yeah, and if you would like me to add to that, when we budget, we have to do it based on what the federal RCMP provides us, and they're usually pretty accurate for the first year or two out. But life happens. I've seen some years where a whole new set of body armor or the new ways of doing business in terms of technology, and that can drive our costs, and we don't have a lot of control over some of those federally driven costs.
Anything else? Councillor Martin?
Thank you. Total expenses have increased by $80,300 and are going to be funded through transfers from reserves. Why are we not paying through that through taxation?
The majority of that is the money that is needed to do the upgrades on the West Shore building, and we do have an agreement that specifically says that when we have a surplus on the cost of running the RCMP building, and we have had small surpluses over the years, we put that money into the RCMP building surplus, and then the agreement states that when capital items are required, that they are drawn out of that reserve fund. And you actually have a reserve fund policy that states that that fund is to be used for those particular capital items.
So of the $80,300, $76,800 is the capital projects that are being spent at the RCMP office?
That's right. And the other small difference is the public art contract?
My second question, if I may, Mayor. I'm familiar with the Greater Victoria Public Library and West Shore Park and Rec and the Wanda Fuca branch. So there is a capital building maintenance plan that basically West Shore Park and Rec is responsible for to give to the library every year regarding maintenance, upkeep, and also improvements. Who's in charge of the capital improvement plans for the West Shore detachment?
Sorry, for the West Shore detachment, the RCMP?
The RCMP detachment.
There is a building committee established in accordance to the agreement that we have.
And so who on council? Is there someone on council who's on that committee?
I think that falls under Langford's purview in it's shared. It's a shared resource, so the staffing, the officers, the building, the improvements, and the responsibilities are shared out. This is something that should have, in my opinion, been brought forward to. We don't have a police board, but we do have a joint municipal group that meets. And our last two meetings have been canceled for no agenda items. So I just don't know when this came up on Langford's radar that we were that late in getting the information.
I guess I have a comment regarding that. If we're looking at a 5-year plan, I don't know why the HVAC upgrades and everything were not on a 5-year plan. Why is it suddenly showing up all of a sudden?
I think this is largely to do with the, when they built that building, they built 3 floors in place with always the intention of further expansion. It's got to that point where they need to expand into that 3rd floor. So this is when it's triggering that information. But to be totally honest, haven't had that report out of Langford, and I haven't seen the information. So it will be on the next agenda that we have in our group meeting.
Your Worship, if I understand the question correctly, the building is owned by the City of Langford, and they're responsible for ensuring that. Owned?
Yeah. If I may, Madam Mayor, sorry to interrupt.
Okay,
The West Shore RCMP detachment is owned by Colwood, Langford, and View Royal. There has always been a police building operating agreement among the 3 owners, and there is a landlord committee that has been formed from the time that ownership took place. And the landlord committee is supposed to have meetings that would speak to and address any kinds of issues that have to do with renovations or additions or changes to the police building itself. So all parties agree. If we can't get agreement, there's an arbitration clause in the operating agreement that would allow us to try to figure out how to move that forward.
So I guess I'm just, I would not be supportive of this capital project until such time as we actually see a report from that committee outlining why and their rationale and plans. It must exist somewhere, so it should be presented to this council so that this council and the public can examine it. So I certainly won't be supporting anything along those lines until such time.
With that in mind, are we looking for referral of this back to finance so that you can get through the other information that needs to be done that may have impact and change?
Yeah, I was hoping that if council desires any changes to the proposed budget, that we could actually have a discussion this evening so that when we bring it back, because we're going to be running out of time, so that when I bring it back in 2 weeks, that we will have incorporated in there any changes that council would like to see. There's been some very good points raised about the maintenance of the building. Like I said, this was the first I had heard of it in the middle of March. It landed literally on my desk with a thunk. And, you know, it's my job to bring it forward to you. And, you know, if council wishes not to include it in this year's budget, well, they will have an issue on their hands, I guess. But fair enough. Like, that's something you may want to pass a motion about this evening to give.
Well, I was just going to say then what we might be doing here is, in addition to what we've got before us, is having a separate motion, Councillor Martin, that seeks that information from the City of Langford as to providing that report. And we can deal with that when it comes through in 2 weeks' time.
Your Worship.
So you...
if I can recommend, I'd actually like it if council would include the $76,500 for the building renos in the budget and just direct us or pass some sort of resolution that signifies that it's been put in as a place marker and that there is unfinished business with Langford that has to be resolved before you authorize the expenditure.
You hearing?
Yeah, I hear it. I won't make that motion.
Councillor Knoll?
Yes, given the report needs a number of corrections and the concerns that Councillor have raised about the police building, I think the appropriate thing would be to refer this to the next council meeting and ask that police building report be attached to the budget at the next meeting or circulated to council before if it's available. So I would make such a motion that this be referred to the next council meeting and that the report on the police building request be forwarded to council before that meeting.
Any further discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. That's what we're looking for.
May I ask a clarifying question for council then, because we are at our deadline. So when I bring the budget back, I will circulate a copy to council prior to the meeting so you have a look at it. And I will include an amount in the budget for this because, okay, thank you.
And we'll deal with it at that point.
And I would ask if we could possibly get it before Thursday at 4 p.m. because if we want to present any questions to the finance department, I believe the director of finance is not in on Fridays. So that leaves us absolutely no chance until the council meeting.
6.2.2, in regards to pre-authorized payment plan implementation. Jen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So we have a memo before council tonight. The city has spoken about this in the past, and we are now ready to implement what is referred to as a pre-authorized payment plan. This essentially would be any taxpayer could make an agreement with the city where we would calculate a monthly payment amount that would be automatically withdrawn from the taxpayer's bank account. And then on the tax due date of each year, the net balance owing would then be automatically withdrawn from the taxpayer's bank account. So currently the only prepayment option we have for taxpayers is that they may drop off post-dated checks. So we are quite excited that we're now in a position where we could roll this out this year. So specifically, if council is supportive of this and if this bylaw does get adopted, we would have a line item on this year's tax notice that would notify all property tax owners that if they were to enroll in this plan, you know, their prepayment amount would be X dollars, and the first withdrawal would be August 1st of this year. And then they would pay their taxes in full on the due date of next year. And if there's any variation, because of course this would just be an estimate of the property tax amount owing, if they did make an overpayment, that overpayment would simply be applied to the following year's property tax levy. So on the flip side of the memo on page 94, you can see the options before you. And you can see the recommendation that staff is making. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Councillor Day?
Thanks. Just a couple of questions before we get there, just because I could imagine a few potential problem scenarios. One scenario that I imagined is, what if there are multiple owners? Say there's 4 owners. Would you actually split that up and receive payments from 4 different accounts?
More than one individual could make a payment on the same folio number. So if you had multiple owners and they wanted to make multiple payments, that being said, then they would likely result in an overpayment on the property tax substantially, because we won't necessarily, when folks sign up to this, they will be required to sign a pre-authorized debit agreement with the city. And we won't necessarily be looking through all records to ensure that we don't have any other property owner who's signed up for that property. In the beginning, I imagine the volume would be quite low, and we probably would know right off the bat.
So just a follow-up to that then, so supposing they signed up and there's more than one property owner paying, and one of them messes up and gets not sufficient funds, maybe they're out of the country, maybe it even happens twice, this could really mess up the whole process. I'm just wondering if you had thought of that and where we would set the NSF fee for that.
So our NSF fee is currently $35, and it is outlined in the draft bylaw before you. If we had 2 rejected prepayments from one taxpayer, they would be basically disallowed from the program and they would be removed. And that rule stands right now with our post-dated checks. If any checks are returned NSF, we no longer accept post-dated checks, or any checks for that matter, from that individual.
And just quick follow-up then, what would they have to do to make good with the city again and be able to write checks to the city?
That's a very good question. We really haven't experienced this too much in the past. To the best of my knowledge, we have had some taxpayers where there have been more than 2 checks that have been returned, and they have known, for whatever the reasons are, that just isn't a tax payment option that works for them. And it is written into our cash handling policy, and it would be written into this bylaw. So technically, I suppose we would bring it back before council if there was someone that was that certain that they wanted to be a part of this program again and it didn't work well the first time, but that hasn't really been the case in the past.
Thank you. I'd be happy to move the recommendation.
Second.
Any further conversation? Councillor Martin?
What happens when the property's sold?
Good question. So any payments are simply applied to the property tax account, and then the balance would be the responsibility between the buyer and the seller at the time of the adjustments between their lawyers. So when a property goes for sale, a property tax information request is made to the city, and we disclose the balance that is on the account. So in all likelihood, it would be a credit balance, and then that would be adjusted for at the time of the sale. So it wouldn't be refunded to the individual who had made the payments. It would simply be adjusted for against the property tax levy.
So, and just as a follow-up, Mayor, so we're not anticipating that there'll be any legality issues regarding a new owner taking over payments that have already been prepaid, that can get negotiated through the real estate deal and not through the city?
Correct. No
Okay,
issues.
so that money doesn't belong to that individual, it belongs to the property.
Correct. It's just applied to the property tax account.
Thank you.
Anybody else? One question to staff or comment. With the homeowner grant, I know that in past we've had a bit of an issue with people doing online applications and missing or out on them if they didn't. Are we going to emphasize strongly the must get them in, even though they might have a zero balance, because it will affect their next year? And I can see, and maybe perhaps a few kind of folks coming through once this triggers in.
Yes, absolutely. So we will be emphasizing that when a taxpayer goes to enroll into the agreement with the city. One, if they will be applying for the homeowner grant, then we can factor that into the calculation so that we aren't requiring them to do an overpayment throughout the year. And staff have already reached out to other municipalities with respect to how they calculate that final payment amount, because we know that there are deadline achievers out there and folks who may come in on July 2nd or 4th this year to claim the homeowner grant. And it sounds like some municipalities will actually wait until the following day to do that final withdrawal, just so that they are certain of whether or not the homeowner grant was claimed by the deadline.
Great, thank you. Staff?
If I could just add one other comment, I wanted to echo what Jen said, that we're excited to be doing this, because this is not new ground that we're breaking. It has been in place for many other municipalities for 20 years or more. And it is another payment option for our taxpayers, for our citizens. And the win for them is that they can spread out their tax payments over 10 months instead of having to try to come up with that big chunk of money in June. And it also is beneficial for city cash flow in that it evens it out over a 10-month period. And it also takes a fair bit of pressure off our front counter in terms of the tax rush. So those are really good questions that you've raised. And we're fortunate that we do have other municipalities that have gone before us that we can reach out for. There's always going to be a few exceptions, but overall, this has been rolled out very effectively in other municipalities as a very smooth way of getting the money in the door. So we're excited to be doing it. Thank you.
I'm looking forward to being number one. I'll beat Gordy to it. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Bylaws number 1657 for final reading to amend CD 21 Zone 333 Whale Road.
Move finally, Your Worship.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. 7.2 bylaw number 1677, first, second, and third readings. If this is the direction we're going, here's where this is the appealing of the secondary suite. Yep. Okay. Council? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
Second.
Discussion? Anyone? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Bylaw number 1678, first and second readings only. What's that? You're trying to get there? Yeah. First and second readings only for land use bylaw number 151, amendment number 160 for secondary suites and accessory buildings.
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
Move second.
Discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. We're skipping 7.4, moving on to 7.5, bylaw number 1676, first, second, and third readings for property tax pre-authorization payment plan, bylaw number 1676.
Move introduction, Your Worship.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Bylaw number 1669, final reading for Colwood Main Sewer Local Area Service Bylaw and Establishment Loan Authorization, bylaw number 598.
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Final bylaw is final reading for Colwood West Sewer Local Area